guess we can start. So thanks everybody for coming from close distance or further distance. Appreciate it. And this was is an occasion to kind of have a discussion about this topic of the significance of Hong Kong in as part of China. Jacob's the one who came up with the title for us. Just another, or not just another Chinese city. The significance of Hong Kong in as part of China. Jacob Dreyer is here. He is an independent writer and a commissioning editor at Palgrave. He has a forthcoming book, tentatively entitled Human Nature, with, how do I say, Bergerin, the kind of big German press and think tank too, right?
It's not that big of a press, but yeah, it's from California. But,
oh, okay.
Nicholas Bergerin is German.
Okay, right. Okay, I didn't know it was based in California. That's great. It's a really fascinating institute, actually. I just looked it up online. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and so it's focused on also imagining the future, I think, right?
That's right.
This kind of stuff. So I think that's a really great topic. And also for this little research hub, which is in part concerned with maybe not the future, but the present future, or this moment of a kind of new era and break, kind of represented by not just the rise of China and the relative decline of the US, that kind of familiar story, but the perception really that new era has already arrived that we're living in, and we're trying to think through its meanings in some ways. So what are the consequences of this? What is this new period, right? And I think Jacob's talk will focus on this a bit. I should also mention Jacob is, as I said, the commissioning editor at Palgrave in economics and politics. He's published 2 of my books very nicely. Also one by our other speaker today, PolyU, I'll introduce in a minute. And Jacob's also written for the New York Times and other venues on related themes in regards to China and the US and things like that. So yeah, he'll present hypotheses about Hong Kong's changing role as a financial center. I'll just go from this blur, but you can see here, but I think it's nice. And what some recall as the glory days, Hong Kong was the funnel of overseas capital into a rapidly developing China. And today it basically operates in the other direction, right? As Chinese capital seeks to interface with the world using Hong Kong as an intermediary. So the question is, what makes Hong Kong so crucial to the evolving Chinese economic model? And how does Hong Kong relate to the manufacturing powerhouse of the Greater Bay Area? As the 15th five-year plan beckons, what distinctive functions can Hong Kong perform that Shanghai, Beijing, Singapore, and Shenzhen cannot? Okay, it's a really interesting question. As I'm sure you all know, this phrase of just another Chinese city is really quite familiar, and it came up a lot in the opposition movement, kind of pan-democratic era, and its activism and kind of legislative politics, etc. And that this was the fear that Hong Kong would become, quote unquote, just another Chinese city. And what was interesting about that, I think, was how much it presumed, first of all, that all Chinese cities are the same, right? So just another one, they're all kind of rubber stamped. And that would be a bad thing overall, period, right? Whereas, if you're really coming at this, I think, from a more informed perspective or analytical perspective, you'd say not only is that kind of impossible, in some ways that would even be a good thing for Hong Kong, because not every Chinese city is the same, right? At the same time, it's also quite clear that Hong Kong is different, and that for all the changes that have happened since 1920 with the national security law, it is still a qualitatively and quantitatively different part of China, and that there's a strong desire from, I think, Beijing as well as in Hong Kong to kind of preserve that relative autonomy, the fact that it is still different, and there's no desire to turn it into just another Chinese city, right? So when Xi Jinping came, I think it was 2022, he basically said the basic law wouldn't change, right? And I know other people have said, even critically, they're saying, I think in some of the mainland papers and liaison office, that Hong Kong needs to make sure it doesn't become just another Chinese city, that it needs to preserve its advantages and act on its uniqueness. So I think it's still a very interesting phrase, but it does kind of beg the question of what will be its contribution and what will its role be. Okay, so anyway, I will turn it over to Jacob in a minute. I'll do that, and then I'll introduce our other speaker, Pan Lu, professor of Chinese history and culture at PolyU University, and former PhD from this very department, Comparative Lit at Hong Kong U. And she's the author of, among other things, numerous books. This book, which is from Hong Kong U Press, about the 70s biweekly, right? It was an important kind of political magazine and grouping in the 1970s of Hong Kong. And it's a really fascinating collection of articles about it and an interview with a couple of the former kind of members on it. Yeah. So, yeah, having said all that, I can turn it over to you, Jacob. Can you, is it okay to stand up here? Yeah.
Make it less visually distracting.
So what I'm hoping what we can do too is everyone in the room, and thank you so much for coming, we can also just have a kind of conversation about this. We can kind of come in your own questions and comments as we go through as well.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be helpful because, as you can see, I'm a white guy who lives in mainland China. So I would have to be a real, really arrogant person to presume. Okay, if you'd like, sure.
Thank you.
Just make sure you're recording. Sure. Yeah, so I guess I come not with a concrete and established thesis so much as a research question, which is what is the function of Hong Kong within this greater Chinese project, which is a technological and a financial, maybe a cultural as well. But there's a lot of very, what you'd say in a corporate setting, quantitative KPIs that are set by the 5-year plan and so on and so forth. So where I would not necessarily speculate what's the point of Knoxville, Tennessee, it just is there and people live there and something like that. But in fact, the novelty of Chinese politics is that they do actually have this master vision of this is for this and that's for that, and Zhejiang is doing that, and then this is that, and it's all sort of organized. So I guess my curiosity is, what's the point of Hong Kong for them? I chose this title of this discussion because I remember back at that time that there was this talk about Hong Kong becoming just another Chinese city. I wasn't that hesitant to reject that at the time, but I'm curious how you guys, those of you who live here, feel, but I feel I can definitively say, as someone who lives in China, this is not another Chinese city. It's totally different in so many ways. First of all, it's much more expensive. Second of all, there are many more foreigners. I can't speak to the legal thing, but I have to assume that it's very different. I think that whatever it is, whether it's good, bad, corrupt, democracy, whatever, I can't comment on that. But I can say really clearly that when you go from here to Shenzhen, you're just going to a different place. So whatever, it's not just another Chinese city. Although I think Dr. Vukovich raised a good point, that this phrase, just another Chinese city, presupposes that all the Chinese cities are the same. Whereas, of course, in reality, they're not. Not even the same in some sort of metaphysical way, but just specifically within the setting of the 5-year plan. I saw this amazing and long article in Xinhua, and it's about the science and technological development of the next 5 years. And in short, it suggested that Shenzhen is there for manufacturing, and Beijing is there for regulations and policy, and Shanghai is there for capital and frontier research. My friend Ben Bratton was like, oh, Shenzhen is China, Beijing is Europe, and Shanghai is America, in the sense of like their respective comparative advantages. So what that is to say is simply within the context of mainland China, as the government continuously is making these plans about how the whole system moves forward to what? According to the plan in 2035, it's 基本社会主义, basically socialism. I find it's very I love the vagueness of the 基本的社会主义，基本是啥玩意儿我不知道。But so anyway, we're going to basically achieve socialism in 2035. And since I had kids, I tend to think of time in terms of my children's age. So that means unless we move somewhere else, that when my older boy Joseph is 12, he'll be living in basically achieved socialism, which is wonderful. And I'm really looking forward to exactly how it's going to be built. But if you read the 5-year plan closely, it's a quite complicated apparatus, and there's a number of things that have to be done to get there. And indeed, Hong Kong has a specific role within it. To take a quick step back, as Dr. Vukovich alluded to my book, I'm publishing these books, I'm writing articles here and there. When I signed the contract with Berger Press, I noticed that a lot of friends of mine in Silicon Valley were saying that in the next 5 years, due to technology, everything is going to change, right, because of AGI or whatever. Everything is going to change. Sam Altman said to Mr. Trump, during your administration, 2024 to 2028, things are going to be completely different. Or Sam Altman says, like, oh, in the 2030s, people will be living in a... Okay, so anyway, they think Silicon Valley and the power structure in the U.S. now thinks completely different. What's interesting about that is when you read what Xi Jinping says about the fourth industrial revolution, they also think that things are going to be completely different in these next 5 or 10 years. So essentially now we are in some situation, whether it's stable or chaotic or whatever we think about geopolitics and life, whether in Hong Kong, anywhere else in 2025. And we can see, just as anthropologists, I don't know if it's true or not, but just anthropologically, the American rich people tribe and the Chinese communist tribe, they both publicly say that they think everything is going to change as a result of technology, specifically AI and automation, in the next 10 years. Okay, that's interesting. That's quite a convergence because many people, for example, the European Union, Japan, they don't say, do even the U.S. Democrat Party think so? I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's my hypothesis that if you think that the goal of government or a society is to just kind of keep maintaining things as they are, then it's rational to acting in a certain way, to fund the schools, keep the bus lines running, whatever, right? But if on the other hand you're saying like the whole world is going to change in 2 years, then why do I care about the bus line, right? Like I'm about to board the spaceship. It's taking off in 30 minutes, so why would I care about all this stuff on the ground? So I wrote for a magazine called The Ideas Letter earlier this winter, or about 9 months ago, shortly after the Trump administration took office. In China, there's this thing, the Guoyedang, the engineering party. It's this large group of online netizens that I would say that China's government has for a long time been a group that sees time as progressive. In other words, if in 5 years nothing about China has changed, that would be like a disaster for everyone involved. All those Chinese government officials have a strong numerical, quantitative measured, like it's a corporate job type measured expectation of like, GDP is going to go up or investment is going to do this or like carbon change, something has to change. No one is hoping that they'll keep everything the same, right? So China's government is structured on the notion of constant change. And if you do not succeed in changing, then you're basically probably going to get in an anti-corruption trial pretty soon. I feel that many Western societies, certainly those in Europe, have been more in like maintenance mode. Like, okay, yeah, America, it's pretty good. Let's just make sure we keep funding the schools or whatever. In contrast to that, I think this sort of, so this Guoyedang in China, this group of online netizens, the people reading Guancha, Eric Lee, these kind of people, they are almost within this Chinese political structure, which is of course not an electoral democracy. These are the individuals observing world politics, and they see the world not as like a political problem that I solve by arguing and talking, but almost as an engineering or a structural problem. And it seems to me that the US now also has a lot of quite influential figures from the world of technology and finance. I guess the point is there's this great convergence between the US and China in this regard. So I pitched the book to Berger, and I said, all right, the elites in both countries think everything's going to change in 10 years, so I would like to write a book about what form those changes will take. And then I did nothing for 4 months. And then in this September, I came to the conclusion, I have no idea what's going to change in the US. I'm an American, so I probably have some emotional issues related to it, such as there's a disease called Trump derangement syndrome, some of you may have heard of. So I'm worried that I'm not able to be objective about the U.S. I may not be objective about China, but for better or worse, the Chinese government are saying all these very real, quantifiable KPIs, right? We'll know very clearly in 5 years if they succeeded or not based on their own numbers. I had this amazing experience in Dalian in the Forestry Bureau. And they said, okay, currently in 2020, there's like 30万个松鼠, 300,000 pine trees in Liaoning province. And we expect that by 2035, in fact, we're going to have 350,000. This is amazing. They're really quantifying almost anything. And I guess the point is it's 2035, and I'm saying, oh, there's not that many pine trees. You're fired. So China, it's great because they have a very clear, detailed, and specific vision of the future, which they've just released the most latest iteration in their 5-year plan. Okay, so I think that the different parts of China, for example, Beijing is doing that, and Shanghai is doing that, and then maybe Greater Bay Area, Dawanshu, whatever that means, is doing this. My question is, what is Hong Kong then doing? So if Hong Kong is just another Chinese city, first of all, it doesn't really make sense, as Dr. Vukovich said, because Beijing is a Chinese city. In China, its function is the political capital. Shanghai is a Chinese city, and its function is to attract foreign investment and have frontier research. Kunming is a Chinese city, and its function is to be the capital of Yunnan and also host CAS's Botany Institute. So all the specific, within the logic of the Chinese economy, there's this division of labor, or this kind of, the logic of comparative advantage is really utilized. So for example, in Xinjiang, where they have a lot of sun, they put the solar panels there. And in Heilongjiang, where they have those black earth, Heitudi, they put a lot of farming there. And so on and so forth. So then within this system, this planned, quantified system, what is the purpose of Hong Kong? Now, back in 2019, I recall two things. First, people said Hong Kong become just another Chinese city. Second, kind of contradictorily, they're like, Hong Kong is screwed. Hong Kong is over. I mean, at that time, most Chinese cities are fine, more or less. I mean, governed by the government of China, but they're not poor. In any case, many people said, oh, like, investment in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange is going to crater. It's all over. Because Hong Kong is based, that's what I alluded to, this golden age. I know quite a few people who grew up in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s. Everyone's getting rich. It's so easy to get rich because Deng Xiaoping has opened China, and then everyone can just whatever, work in HSBC or something, and then real estate goes up and up. And so a lot of people have happy memories of that time. And a lot of people at that time in the protest movement, you could see a generation who felt things are getting worse. I don't know if things are getting worse or the mainland is getting better too fast or whatever it is. That's also not the subject of my talk, so I'm not going to go there. In any case, I would just say it seemed to me that in 2019, many people had the expectation or said that they had the expectation that first, Hong Kong was going to be forcibly Chineseified, whatever that means. And second, Hong Kong's economy and its special economic role was going to be wrecked by the national security law. So it's my opinion today, I welcome your views, Hong Kong is actually not a Chinese city, or it's not another Chinese city anyway. It's completely unique. I would say, to me, Hong Kong is significantly more different than a Chinese city. Like Taipei is much more of an ordinary Chinese type of feeling place to me. Singapore is more of a Chinese city than Hong Kong today, actually. That's just my own empirical view. And I double-checked because I was curious, what are the numbers? And I discovered, with respect to the point of capital, so my argument, maybe you'll agree, is that Hong Kong's function in the global economy and with respect to mainland China in like the 80s, back to the 60s, it's actually just a relatively not very rich place. But in the 80s and 90s, this boom time, Deng Xiaoping has reformed and opened. Hong Kong is the place where foreigners who want to invest in China live. Taiwanese people can go to mainland, but for people from England and America, they're going to come here. There's all these, Americans working at Goldman or JP Morgan or whatever, and that's going to be here. And those guys make a good salary, so Hong Kong is a kind of financial entrepot based on outside investors pouring capital from mostly the US into mostly China. So capital, we think of it as like liquid, fluid. For whatever reason, there's so many metaphors about financial capital that seem like water. So I was telling Dan, I have this friend whose son really enjoys like kind of fishing and playing with frogs in this big water pipe between the mainland and Hong Kong. And I think of Hong Kong as almost like having this kind of hydraulic function. Because if all the American capital just dumps onto China all at the same time, it's going to be a disaster for the investors and for everyone else. So Hong Kong had all these banks and regulators and apparatus, which allows the capital to slowly go into the correct place and be measured and having the rule of law and all that sort of stuff. So when the US capital met Chinese labor back in that 80s, 90s period, Hong Kong had this critical role. And then for reasons that are arguably completely independent of Hong Kong itself, the US and China has started this kind of decoupling process, which is, there is empirical data, the trade between the US and China seems to be going down. However, and that's what people were worried about. I think that the fear that Hong Kong's place was being lost as China and the West decoupled was converging with the sense of, oh, Hong Kong's economy is screwed and it's because of the national security law. Anyway, I know that the stock market is not the real economy, but according to my AI, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has had a robust 2025. It's up 23% compared to 2024. And in fact, it's done better even than the US stock exchanges. And this has been an amazing year for the US stock market. So Hong Kong is like really, things are going very fantastically well in finance in Hong Kong. I know many people in Hong Kong don't work in finance, so that may not be very comforting to them. But if Hong Kong's original purpose back in the 80s is to let capital move from one place to another, it seems that the Hong Kong financial exchanges are doing very well today. That seems like it's a verifiable, falsifiable fact. It could have happened that because of the national security law, Hong Kong now is just crashed. But in fact, it hasn't. Why? A lot of this movement that we've seen in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange this year has been about Chinese biotech firms or AI firms that there had been this idea of making Shanghai an international financial center. But Shanghai, I live in the place for many years. I like it. It's not an international city at all. There's probably more foreigners in Knoxville, Tennessee than in Shanghai, I suspect. There's nothing wrong with that. Chinese people are very nice. But anyway, Shanghai is definitely a very Chinese city. I think it's safe to say. There's very good and specific reasons why those of you who work in finance or have friends who work in finance, why would a mainland Chinese company choose to list in Hong Kong and not in Shanghai and also not in New York? But anyway, they're there, and the empirical evidence is that this has been such an amazing year for Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So I guess what I would say, in short, is that Hong Kong had the function of letting American capital meet Chinese labor. Now Hong Kong has the function of letting Chinese technology companies find capital to invest it in places like Southeast Asia or the so-called Global South. But in that way, it's like as if the lock has been reversed. At first, the boat is going from here to there. Now it's going from here to there. But Hong Kong's structural function as being the intermediary through which capital flows is relatively, it's still there. So just to finish up, I thought I was going to speak briefly, but it's turned into like 20 minutes. Why would the mainland government want Hong Kong to just be another Chinese city? There are so many cities in China. For those of you who've spent much time in mainland China, you'll know it's exhausting. Even you just go around like Sichuan province, there's like probably like 15 cities the size of Chicago or something. I don't know. There's just so many Chinese cities. I think that Dr. Vukovich alluded to how in the mainland they actually want Hong Kong to retain its special function. I think that makes sense. There are many things that the mainland government cannot do in Shanghai that they want to do, and they can do in Hong Kong. Just to name one example, the last time I was in Hong Kong, and I'll finish shortly. Last time I was in Hong Kong, I saw my friend Louis Vincent Gave, who owns the Gavekal financial consultancy firm. And he was at the time very interested that Pan Gongsheng of the People's Bank of China had made some sort of statement about how China's foreign reserves of dollars were going to get recycled through the Hong Kong market. I'll try to make a long story short because I didn't completely understand it myself. But Mr. Gabe told me what the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar. So somehow, if the mainland wants to get rid of all of its US dollar reserves, it can somehow, using stocks and real estate in Hong Kong, to turn them into something else and sort of flush them out into the world. And that's something Shanghai could not do, Shenzhen could not do, Beijing could not do. So in short, it's my hypothesis, and I hope that you guys will problematize it, that first, as of today, Hong Kong is not just another Chinese city. It's completely different from Chinese cities. Nothing wrong, no value judgment. I live in a Chinese city, it's great. Hong Kong is not just another Chinese city. And number two, Hong Kong's comparative advantage is in fact exactly in its difference from Shanghai. If Hong Kong was just a smaller, shittier version of Shanghai, then no one cares. Hong Kong's playing a critical role within the Chinese system of finance and technology. And it is precisely in the fact that it is not just another Chinese city that allows it to do so. So that's my hypothesis. Thanks.
Great. Great. That's cool. I think, why don't we have a few questions? Yeah, we'll do some of this, and then we'll go to our next speaker. We'll do that again, and then we can kind of reconvene for other questions and comments and things like that to bring up. But it is now. I thought that was great. I thought, and I'll pass around the mic, but Jacob, I mean, I appreciate you putting this as a hypothesis and just kind of opening it up and questioning it. But I think you're making a lot of really apt points about this, and that, you know, a couple of things that struck me towards the end there. You're talking about how Hong Kong is more international and diverse, things like that, and I think it is actually radically diversifying. I'm not sure this quite gets recognized enough outside of Hong Kong in a way, because they think that, like, for example, at the university, we get far fewer Caucasian students on exchange or visiting than we used to. There's still some, and maybe they grew up in Hong Kong, stuff like that. But we get many more of these like international students from around Belton Road, which includes Trinidad, which is always was the moment in which I realized that it's yeah. So I mean, we're seeing this all the time, and I just had a student this fall in my first year class. He's from Kazakhstan, speaks Russian, I think a little bit of Arabic and Persian, and of course English and all these really fluently, et cetera. And I've had this kind of similar experience probably other people had too. Like, so it's actually diversifying in this way too, right? Which I think is notable, or like that. Yeah, so he's talking about comparative advantage. That's a really interesting one. But I liked your initial kind of framing of this early on. Like we talked about, if you were a government or system or society, and what your chief interest was politically and otherwise was really maintaining the status quo and not changing. You want to keep it like one certain way, right? That would be the opposite of how China's governed and what its kind of dynamic is, which is to embrace kind of change constantly and engineer that change and all that kind of stuff. And then also their belief that the whole world is changing, and then there's a kind of embrace of that, right? Which has been around for a while. But it's interesting because there were, maybe there still are, parts of Hong Kong that were really in that former camp, that the idea was to really maintain a status quo, right? And so when you see that changing, that's the bad thing, right? And I'm not sure why. I would be interested in what other people think about that. But there was such a kind of deep, I call it cathexis, or just a kind of deep connection to status quo, maintain, don't change, it's great, which was really folded into notions of autonomy, where even though the basic law doesn't say like absolute autonomy, it's anyway, the discussion you can have on that kind of thing, but it was a high degree of autonomy, right? Never really implied no change, right? So to me, the dynamic in Hong Kong until maybe the last few years was really this powerful tension or kind of resistance to change, period. Right? You just didn't want it, and you wanted to preserve this autonomy, because on the other side of even a small incursion into autonomy was a disaster. Right? So I think that so much of that was connected to a certain articulation of Hong Kong identity and its separateness or difference from mainland, or even from being Chinese, and things like that. It's to the rise of not just localism, but of a nativism that was really rooted in that. So there's this resistance to that, and really strong, strong desire to maintain that status quo, right? Which is interesting. And I'm not saying it was the only Hong Kong identity, or necessarily was everybody, but I think that Hong Kong's crisis in that first handover period was really around this, a kind of a certain understanding of autonomy, right? And what fueled a kind of sense of desperation, I think, that really kind of came to a head in 2019-20 in that way. But I think what's happening now is, you know, by hook or by crook, or by force, really, that the society and certainly the government is getting better at, or having to learn how to be part of a system of change or embrace change, so that it's not just simply being sucked into the mainland system. It's not in the plans in the way that like Shenzhen, Shanghai, like these are all built into the plans, right? It's still kind of nebulous, but it is kind of learning to do that and embrace it. Yeah, and I think that seems to be happening in Hong Kong more generally, but I'd be interested in what other people feel that way, right? So in some ways, it's really different perspectives on change in the future, things like that, that is going through, right? Anyway, that's more my comment. Let me ask others if they have comments, questions for Jacob. Yeah, maybe we'll use the mic.
Jacob, thanks. It's a good, although brief presentation. First, let me say I concur with you. It's Hong Kong is not just another Chinese city. And then, if I may, Dan, can I make it kind of a conversational? First, a bit introduction to myself. I think a bit unlike maybe not all, but most of you, I'm not a currently academic. Thanks to Dan's kindness, I was invited to join this kind of discussions as a think tank, a runner. I used to be a businessman ever since I graduated from Beida and Oxford. And I've been here in Hong Kong for more than 30 years. And my name is Terry Su. And I run, as I said, I run a think tank, Lulu. This is my logo. And I would say, you know, this a business experience for the past almost 20, more than 20 years helped my angle to see this stuff. Okay, and I also, as Dan knows, now I write regularly for South China Morning Post on geopolitics for the past 4 years, and put this the current topic in this context. I think, you know, I would like, if I can, give you some perspective of my own. First, as I said, I agree with Jacob. Definitely, after all this that has happened to Hong Kong, Hong Kong is still unique, not just another Chinese city. And I can tell from my own experience as a new Hong Konger, as I prefer to call myself, and what I like to say to people is that more than 30 years ago, I came over to Hong Kong, transit Hong Kong to Britain for a study at Oxford with a flight, on the flight sponsored by my sponsor, a Swire Group. And when I touched it down, I don't know if you guys do remember, even today, when Cathay or previously Dragonair, when they touched down in Hong Kong, approaching the dusk, right? The sweet voice of the stewardess would say, we would turn off the light for you to appreciate the beautiful night sight of Hong Kong. That was the first time I was doing so, being a poor student, first time taking the flight, and first time out of China. And I was stunned by the night view I saw. And that's still, in my mind. And fast forward to now. Back then, I just fell in love with Hong Kong instantly. That's why I asked for a job from my sponsor. And then I was given the first job with Dragonair, which back then was just established. And I just like to tell the people who would like to hear, who would like to listen to me, I fell in love with Hong Kong back then. And today, I just like the city as much as I did the first time I was here, despite all this which has happened. Okay, this is my first point from my own experience. The second, 2 years after my study in Oxford, and I volunteered to come to work in Hong Kong and turned, stupidly, sometimes I thought, turned down my supervisor's invitation for me to go on with DPhil study with her. She said I had talent for academic work. Maybe she just tried to flatter me, but I said no. She said, why? I said, I need money. And then I came to Hong Kong and asked for a job from my sponsor, Swire. And then here comes the point. I shared this information with my fellow Chinese student in Oxford. I said, I'm going back to work in Hong Kong. I still remember, I'm not exaggerating, guys, when I tell you this. I can still remember, the guys, upon hearing this from me, they look at me as if I were a stupid person. So the reason why I tell this story is to set, my viewpoint in a context back then, how great Hong Kong, how uncertain the people of my background felt about Hong Kong, right? So that's the first, it's a kind of a very impressive, a scene I still, keep on my mind. And then, of course, the rest is history. And China just, burst onto the track of growth. And Hong Kong had its glorious days. And I was lucky enough to be among those who benefited personally from this development. I came to work as a Dragonair, a flat man, airline man. And then I turned myself into an iBanker. And I just traveled around, to broker sort of the growth of China. And, of course, I made my share of money out of it. And then suddenly the things changed for 6 years ago. So what happened? And then just back to your point, Jacob, what happened after, almost 25 years development? And so much so that people like you are asking the question, is Hong Kong just another Chinese city? Okay, the part of my answer was actually a notice I'd like to put to you guys. What was Hong Kong, say, before or prior to 2019, when that series of incidents broke out? If you ask me, I would say people have to realize, although Hong Kong's a sovereignty returned to China officially in 1997, actually up to 19 2018, 2019, Hong Kong was tacitly co-ruled by Chinese government in Beijing and by the United States of America. This is my point, and you may think about it. Because that tacit agreement or the tacit co-management was broken, that's why the storm broke out. And I would like to remind you of the words by the previous American General Counsel to Hong Kong. Is he named May? I heard, you can check it from South China Morning Post, at least twice. It was reported that the first few days he was in Hong Kong, and then 2 years or 3 years after he was in Hong Kong, he was reported to tell the guys from the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong to such an extent, or to the effect that, hey, you guys, why are you still here? Hong Kong is dead. Get out. So my point is that this is a kind of a geopolitical struggle, and Hong Kong is just caught in the middle of the storm. So when we look at this kind of question, we may have to take this angle for it. Okay, I think I've covered too much.
Yeah, I mean, Jacob, you touched on that too, that it really got caught in between, right? The U.S. and China in 19. Other questions, comments for Jacob? Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I just want to work with hopefully even more outside of that. So because I worked in Central Asia for a couple of years, and so students are crazy about the opportunity to come to Hong Kong to study there. And so usually they think they don't need to speak Chinese and they can easily to adapt here. And not everybody can get US visa to study in the US from that region as well. So how do you foresee this kind of changes, more engage with Belt Road stuff or Global South? Is part of the China strategy, or it's because it's a kind of independent hub for the Global South international people? Thank you.
Thanks. I think one of my own dominating theories or master theories is that for a long time, when you were doing this work, China's economy was from below to above. China is the place of low-cost labor, where we make stuff that we sell in Walmart in the US and European Union. Right? That was the structure of the Chinese economy. But as many things have changed, including Chinese moving up the value chain, labor cost, many other things as well, now China's not all, but most exciting industries are from above to below. That is to say, selling technologically sophisticated things like Xiaomi phones or cars, solar panels, the batteries made by Ningde Shidai, and a lot of other stuff like that. If you look at a lot of these listings on the Hong Kong market this year, a lot of have been biotech companies, Chinese biotech stuff. Now, if you're in mainland China, they have no shortage of great researchers in biotech, but it's almost impossible to make a lot of money in mainland China for a variety of reasons. So basically, if you're a Chinese guy and you want to list your firm, you may also nowadays face trouble in the US. I met quite a few Chinese entrepreneurs who are like, well, ideally we would love to list in New York, but you see what's happening with ByteDance and TikTok, and you feel like basically there's no point. So Hong Kong. So in other words, I feel the macro change of China has been where before it's like a low-cost place serving the developed world, and now its economy, not all, but the focus of policymakers is high value-added, technologically sophisticated things, which it sells to the global south. That is, instead of selling plastic cups to Walmart in America, now I'm selling EV cars to Brazil, to Indonesia. So that's a change. Instead of from below to above, now it's from above to below. But Hong Kong is still playing this vital intermediary function. So to get to your practical point, let's say I'm like a rich kid from Mongolia or Uzbekistan or Brazil or whatever, and I want to study in China because whatever reason. Well, I can go to NYU Shanghai, which by the way is very expensive. I could try to go to Schwarzman in Tsinghua. I guess he lived in Beijing. I also used to live in Beijing. Beijing is not a very easy place. Beijing is basically a place for Chinese people. Even a lot of Chinese people find it difficult to get. It's a huge and complicated place. I think that it's safe to say, for better or worse, that Hong Kong is a lot more user-friendly, or maybe it's more to say the designated user of Hong Kong could be a foreign tourist. Beijing is very user-friendly for the user. The user is, the party, and they get their use out of it. But I think that if I'm just like that rich kid in Tashkent, yeah, Hong Kong is a lot, and HKU even specifically is a lot more, even just how do I even apply, making a lot more sense than like Tsinghua or NYU Shanghai. I don't know. I've never been one, but it makes sense to me, right? Because you can come here. I was with my friend Torn in Guangzhou not long ago, and he was telling me about these Nigerians he met here or Guangzhou. Do you remember that? You met these Nigerian finance guys in Hong Kong. So if you're like a Nigerian finance guy, right? Obviously, China is like this very rich economy and all that sort of stuff. How can a Nigerian guy work in finance in Shanghai? It's just not, first of all, like the salary in finance in Shanghai is actually not so high anymore, but like by law. But second of all, it's just really, China is not an immigration society. Hong Kong is where that Nigerian guy wants to go. It makes sense. Hong Kong is a special economic zone, just like Shenzhen is. But its special economic function is more about finance than production. So I think it makes perfect sense that if you're like, oh, I need to do something about China, but actually it's very hard to do something about China, yeah, Hong Kong is a great solution, half in, half out.
It's great. Yeah. Thanks. So I think we've arrived at a few, we touch on this in passing, but it's the English is still a kind of lingua franca, or a language you can live and work in or study in as a student. That's key, right? It's the specifically, Commonwealth law, this kind of particular legal system which is kept intact, which is still intact, and which I think is still partly what makes it, if the question is, what role does Hong Kong have? It's the same role. It still has those things, right? But I think when you bring up this question of immigration, that's also a really good one, because that is also what it's a space of, right? And has been its advantage and strength, right? So it's interesting. I want to turn over to Professor Pan. We can come back to Jacob's presentation too when we do this. So I did just briefly earlier, I want to introduce my dear colleague, Iris, again. I mentioned that she was, not that long ago, a graduate of our department. When I came here, I think you started the following year as a PhD student, right? And I think yeah, it's like, I haven't been there that long. I think you were our first graduate student who had roots from mainland China. And Maran, you came the same year, right? Professor Maran also, and you've just gone on to do really fabulous things. So Professor Pan is a professor at the Department of Chinese History and Culture at Hong Kong PolyU. She has written 3 monographs, one of them with Palgrave. That one is called, that's Invisible Palimpsest, right? The first one? Memory, Space, and Modernity. Oh, Image, Imagination, and Imaginary. So you have so many, it's hard to keep track. Okay, great. That's excellent. And I already mentioned the 70s bi-weekly book published from Hong Kong U Press. And she is also a filmmaker, and she's working on another film, which is connected to her most recent book I just heard about today on Hainan, which will come out eventually with, we don't know yet, but it will come out eventually. I won't jinx it. Yeah. So turn it over to you. Yeah, maybe that's a bit easier to work with, if you want to hold that.
Works. Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a while since I last give a talk here at Hong Kong U, and thank you so much. I appreciate it for this opportunity, and also with my old friend Jacob and I was thinking about when did we know each other? Maybe 15 years ago. Yeah, yeah. Also, old friends. Thank you so much. So. My talk today will be a bit different from what Jacob talked about. It will be on yeah, 2 years ago, this book was published, recent research, going back to the 70s here in Hong Kong. And I was focusing on a particular magazine. It's called the 70s Biweekly. And although the project started in around 2017, but it came out like 2 years ago, and so many things happened in Hong Kong. So eventually, I feel this book is also maybe a letter or a response to what happened, or I hope it can be of some value in the future for people who are interested in Hong Kong, how its culture and the cultural production, or even history of social activism has come to what it is today. So I would just give a quick introduction of this project. And also this book, if you want to get a copy after my talk, it's available in Hong Kong New Press bookstore. Just yeah, downstairs. Anyway. Okay, so this is also the book title. This book called 70s Biweekly Social Activism and Alternative Culture Production in the 70s Hong Kong is structured in 3 parts. I try to offer a comprehensive view of the political and the cultural activism that shaped Hong Kong in the 1970s. So it not only examines the magazine's writings on art and film. Yeah, you can maybe pass it around and you can have a look at it. But also features interviews with former founders and the contributors. Many of them actually become very important people, cultural figures in Hong Kong later. I think these interviews are particularly valuable as they review how involvement with the 70s Biweekly led participants to engage deeply with activism and community, often in ways that extended far beyond the magazine's pages and lifespan. So 3 parts. The first part is more about the political idea. So radicalism and its discontents. So Professor Lo Wing-sun contributed this chapter about one of the 2, I think, leading figures of this magazine, Zhongyi. And for your reference, there's also a film made about Zhongyi. It's called The Story of Zhongyi by Evans Chan, Hong Kong filmmaker. Yeah, it's also a very interesting one. And also whose PhD thesis was about anarchism in Hong Kong, contributed a chapter about Hong Kong's radical new left, which we can see the tendency also in some of the articles published in this magazine. And also 2 more authors wrote about how you can see the imaginary or imagination of Asia and the world consciousness in the 70s Hong Kong reflected in the articles in this magazine. Maybe that would provide an interesting reference for us to see how Hong Kong felt itself not entirely Chinese, but also Chinese, that kind of complicated feeling, okay? And the second part is more about the aesthetic and the literary production you find in these magazines. So I myself wrote about the aesthetics because I will show you later, because I was first drawn to this magazine because it's really interesting cover images. It's fascinating. And so there are actually a lot of artistic and aesthetic content that you can find in this magazine. And film criticism, a lot of about movies. And also how this magazine is also related to the cinematic or the cinephile communities, as well as cinematic practices. Actually, I published another article, which I will introduce you briefly later, about how the contributors of articles, of writings of this magazines also make experimental films in the 70s. And also literary representations. There are poems, there are short stories published in this magazine too. So it's a very rich, combination of different genres of writings that you can find in this magazine. And the last part is the interviews. So we have John Shan. I don't know if you know about this guy. He's very legendary, I think, a person in film industry in Hong Kong, but also he was famous for his support to the activists in the 89 student movements. And, so there's a lot of interesting story behind this guy. So anyway, we had an interview with him. And some others, who are also maybe active now. For example, the last guy, he's now I think you can find his book. He's a storyteller. He tells stories to children of Hong Kong today and try to do a certain kind of alternative pedagogy in different communities. So some of them are still very active. So these are the interviews. So if you're interested in this magazine and you want to have a look at them, I recommend you to check this online archive out. It's available under Hong Kong Baptist University's library, and it's fully open. So if you check this one, and you can find most of the scanned copies of the 70s Biweekly, but also many other magazines published in Hong Kong. So in relation to this project, I also independently published two more other publications. One was published in Modern China. It's a more thorough, introduction to this whole, to the magazines called New Left Without Old Left. That's my framing of how we understand Hong Kong's New Left at that time. And the other one, as I mentioned, is more about the 70s Biweekly and Hong Kong's experimental cinema, especially those are more socially critical rather than just, those pursuing aesthetical, purposes. And more extended reading might be an earlier one in 20th century China called Imagining Asia Through Tour of the Orient, Cathay Pacific's Contemporary Art in Asia exhibition of 1965. So I look at this exhibition not from a point of view of art history, because I'm not an art historian, but to see how actually Hong Kong's corporates, big corporates like Swire Group, or I'm of the opinion that some of the most interesting archives in Hong Kong are not only the public record office in Kwun Tong, but corporate archives such as Swire's archive or HSBC archive or Kadoorie family's archive. I think these business groups, they actually have a lot of history to tell about the city. And so, so this is also my initial exploration about Hong Kong's history in relation to visual culture and or social cultural history. So, I want to just give you some more ideas about this this magazine. So I think it's important to situate this magazine within a broader context of Hong Kong society in the 60s and 90s. It was a period of a rapid change and uncertainty. So Hong Kong was emerging from a shadow of World War II and the Chinese Civil War, and was experiencing significant social, economic, and political transformations. The late 1970s and early 1960s and early 70s were marked by, for example, the aftermath of the so-called 1967 riots, a time of intense social unrest, and definitely connected to the ongoing Cultural Revolution in mainland China, which had a profound impact on Hong Kong's political climate and cultural identity. And during this time, I think British colonial government sought also to promote a Hong Kong local identity, maybe first time in history, aiming to kind of, I think, depoliticize social life and encourage citizens to focus on economic growth and stability rather than political engagement. Somehow I feel some similar kind of tendency in post-2019 Hong Kong. However, this official narrative was challenged by also waves of global student movement and countercultural trends around the world. We can find these impacts from the U.S., from Japan, from Europe. Inspired by events from these places, young people in Hong Kong began to question authority and seek alternative forms of expression. This led to the emergence of underground and the independent magazines, as well as a boom in so-called literary journals, 文社刊物嘛，which provided platforms for dissenting voices and creative experimentation. So some of these magazines are on display here. So it was in this vibrant and contested environment that the 70s Biweekly was launched on January 1st, 1970. The magazine was unique, being bilingual, published both in Chinese and English, which allowed it to reach a wider audience and foster dialogue across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Its coverage was broad and ambitious, addressing major social and political issues of the day. For example, it reported on the anti-corruption campaign against Peter Godber, a British police officer whose scandal exposed deep-seated corruption in colonial administration. It also covered the Defend Diaoyu Island movement, which mobilized the young youth around issues of Chinese sovereignty, and the campaign to make Chinese an official language in Hong Kong, which didn't happen until the mid-1970s. And anti-Vietnam War protests, reflecting the magazine's engagement with both local and global struggles. So, yeah, these are some of the, I mean, if you look at the cover image, they are very eye-catching. I think they take a lot of visual reference from magazines such as Life or, you know, other Western models, I think. But they do some unauthorized revisions as I did my interview with the designers. So the 70s Biweekly quickly gained a reputation as a magazine of the New Left, a movement characterized by its rejection of both traditional conservatism and orthodox communism, and its embrace of radical democracy, social justice, and cultural experimentation. It was also seen as a journal of youth radicalism with a strong anarchist influence, especially the other, because of the other, I mean, one of the two key figure souls of this magazine, one is Zhongyin, the other is PolyU. So he has a very clear anarchist tendency. However, it's also important to clarify that anarchism in the Hong Kong context did not mean advocating for complete abolition of the state. Rather, it signified a resistance to injustices imposed by any authority, whether that was the British colonial government or the Chinese Communist government, US imperialism, or Japanese imperialism. So the magazine's contributors believed in challenging all forms of oppression and promoting autonomy, equality, and even direct action. So basically, you see a lot of even, opposing political ideas, or at least the spectrum of political thoughts are very wide in this magazine. So that really makes me think about if it's possible to have such a magazine today, And the editorial team of the magazine played a crucial role in shaping its direction and impact. So, as I mentioned, Zhong Yin is a key figure, known for his activism during the 1969 Zhuhai College Student Union incident, where he opposed the administrative manipulation and fought for student rights. And PolyU, the other founding member, returned to Hong Kong in the late 1960s after studying in Australia, where he studied economy. He became one of the first generation of Hong Kong anarchists and was deeply involved in local theater, using performance as a tool for social critique and community building. And their leadership, I think, and vision helped the 70s become a hub for radical thoughts and creative activism, at least the early years. This is PolyU. So the influence of the magazine extended beyond its original run. After about 3 years, it inspired other publications, such as the 70s Youth Avant-Garde, which target more at with middle school or high school students, which focuses on youth activism, and the New Trend, or women's rights, which address feminist issues. And these derivative magazines reflected the diversity and the dynamism of the movement, and also, I think, how youth at that time in Hong Kong was looking at or thinking. However, by 78, financial and organizational challenges led to the stop of the magazine, and the editorial team also disbanded. Despite this relatively short lifespan, the magazine's legacy continued to shape Hong Kong's cultural and political landscape. So I will just go really quickly because it's more my theoretical framing that I try to use Michael Warner's idea of counter-public. So I think, all these, no matter the publications in this magazine or the activism, the direct action they organized, or even theatrical or cinematic practices they did, forms a kind of counter-publics. And this process was not just about protest, but also about building new identities and ways of relating one to another. Yeah, and I will also skip this part. I think you're all familiar with this idea of public sphere. So the magazine's content, I think, reflected four major concerns of these people at that time. First, it addressed the cultural and the social injustices, challenging discrimination, inequality, and exclusion. And second, it engaged with political issues in and around mainland China, including impact of the Cultural Revolution and the debates about sovereignty and identity. And third, it critiqued the manipulation of mass culture, exposing how media and popular entertainment could be used to control and pacify the public. I think this is more about local issue. And finally, it explored the formation of a distinct Hong Kong identity, encouraging readers to think critically about their place in the world and their relationship to both China and the West. My research basically focusing on the aesthetics. So I think this is one of the innovative strategies they used. I mean, and make them stand out from similar, magazines published around the same time. That most of the other youth magazines, basically they're focusing on text and language. But this magazine, they use a lot of visual strategies. And so these covers are usually very bold and provocative, and to use images and design to signal radicalism and attract attention. So you can see avant-garde art, modern design, experimental literature, and this kind of alternative taste community is really important here. Another key strategy was also circulation and direct action. I think it's action-oriented magazine. As I mentioned, the major activism they were involved in, including the Defend Diaoyu Islands campaign and also the Chinese as official language in Hong Kong campaign. But they also published a lot about, for example, Bangladesh independence or anti-Pan Am kind of, or anti-Vietnam War, articles and reports. There are a lot. It's not only about China. It's not only about Hong Kong, but also about the entire world. I think, because of this aesthetic and the taste community, I think members of this magazine went on to not political direct action, but what I would say is a kind of a cultural direct action. So PolyU, for instance, was involved in a people's theater, a form of political theater that used performance to engage audiences and promote grassroots democracy. And also films. There's a very interesting film called it was released in 1978 called To Cultural Use of Hong Kong, which I also elaborated in my article. And later, there's also the music side of their influence. So there is a band called Blackbird, and they were active in the 80s, and even maybe all the way to now. And they have this film called A Living Song, mixing music and also, experience of these young people, their participation in World Convention or Congress of Anarchists in Italy, and it's a kind of a road film that very interesting and very rare in Hong Kong film history, I would say. So it's multimedia, and it's very culturally oriented, but they are all very much connected to a broader sense of struggles and social change. This is People's Theater, and also this is, for example, shots from this film Cultural Use of Hong Kong, and this is Living Song, Guo Danian, and also PolyU. So they visit Venice in 84. To conclude, I think the 70s Biweekly was a nodal point for social and cultural activism in Hong Kong during the period of the city's profound transformation. It created counterpublics through both text and affect, blending political radicalism with art and media to build an engaged and participatory community. So the magazine encouraged its readers to move from passive consumption to active involvement in shaping their society and culture. So although its publication ceased in 1978, I think its influence can still be felt in Hong Kong's cultural practice today. maybe in unexpected ways. And its legacy, I hope, continues to inspire new generations of activists and artists. So these are some of my references. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. It just in itself, right? And it's such a, especially outside of Hong Kong, completely unknown period of its history, right? And very different than that kind of post-handover era of politics and groupings and things like that. It's just radically different. I was struck also when I read this, and your introduction to the book is really excellent because it contextualizes the 70s for us, and it steers us through their various debates. The diversity of them. So you said somewhere in your presentation that I wonder if this could exist today, because you had like Maoists or neo-Maoists and Trotskyists, but also kind of liberals, because there's a strong liberal influence in them, whether they know it or not, and anarchists, which are kind of diverse itself, right? And usually none of those things can exist for 8 years together making a zine or something like that. 8 weeks would be a lot, right? So that's kind of interesting in itself there too. I would just have one comment, maybe, if it's useful. Thinking of this also in terms of Jacob's questions and what we were mentioning and talking about a little bit earlier of the embrace of change. And again, really different Communist Party today, all that kind of stuff. But like, and you even mentioned the American right. I want to get back to that a little bit too. The kind of, you're talking about a convergence there, but that's for later. But surely for this group in the 70s, this perception that the whole world is changing rapidly and it's going to be totally different 5 years from now would have felt familiar to them, right? And I would think, is it in a more positive sense? Because like if that post, I would say post 97, but really 14, 19 kind of sense among the youth was the whole world is changing for the worse and it's terrible and we can't let it change and it's pretty much all China's fault. Kind of something like that kind of sentiment is so different. But would it for them have been something that they would kind of embrace, right? Because when you think of it, and I won't claim to really know it all, but like you do like John Shum and some of the other ones who went on to have very successful careers and lives. They didn't stop. Right? They didn't give over to something bad or nihilism. They didn't become right wingers or whatever. They kind of like kept doing stuff. And that's a different attitude towards change, maybe themselves too. So maybe that was kind of consistent through at least some of them or their generation. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think at that time when they were like protests and doing all these magazine stuff, I think they think the word is is terrible. But I see similar stories maybe elsewhere. After the student movement, a very radical student movement, many of them actually went into more mainstream industries. I think this happens in Hong Kong as well. Zhongyin later becomes editor in Playboy. Yes. And I think Mo Chuyu more or less is still going his own way. So he insisted in doing theater for community. Not long ago, he was still active in the JCCAC, I mean, the community theater, and also, I think recently he left Hong Kong. But anyway, but some other people went to film industry. I mean, John Sham is one of these people who became very successful in film industry. But one of the earliest contributors of the 70s biweekly is John Woo. Yes, so he was also making experimental films at that time. You can still find, it's called Death Note or something. It was made in 69. John Woo become the Hollywood Hong Kong filmmaker. So yeah, I see this, but I think this is not Hong Kong is not the only place where after all these radical, no matter it's successful or not, I mean, depending on how you define success, right? So many people find the way into mainstream industry, but they did change the city and the cultural scene in another way. And I feel it's not bad as well. I mean, both are important. I mean, what they did in the 70s or what they did in the 80s and 90s. But for example, there's one guy I also did an interview with who as he was actually the chief editor of this very important film magazine in Hong Kong, and it's basically the incubator for the golden what's the name of the award, the golden award of Hong Kong film. So I think they yeah, it's both important, and they did make a change, even if not from what you saw directly from this magazine. And when I started to research on this magazine, I was surprised why nobody wrote about this before. Why no other people has recognized its importance? For me, it's so important. Yeah. So this is a haunting question for me. I think there might be more of these kind of topics that waiting and are still waiting to be explored. Yeah.
Small, right? And they weren't like a party, if I'm understanding, right? They weren't like were the people's blah, 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 front something like that, right? They were doing this magazine and many things at once. So I guess you get lost that way too.
And there's another magazine also called the 70s, but it's written in Chinese 70s. And that one was way more famous because it's, I think, more related to so-called older left and the historians and also maybe, media studies people find this more valuable in a way. And maybe the political, opinions are more unified, consistent in a way. The 70s biweekly is... Yeah, that one. I mean, the Chinese one. Yes, Bali, yeah. So that one was much more famous than this one. Yes. So I was also thinking as academia, yeah. So what kind of materials we're looking at? I mean, if everybody was talking about that 70s, so more people will do that one. And nobody was really thinking about this one. So, but I was thinking what was going on and what we can do next if we want to know more about Hong Kong and its cultural legacies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So other comments, questions? Yes, we say yeah.
I probably could just Google it up, but I mean, since you're here, so like I could just ask. And I have like a conceptual question after. Hello. Yeah. You mentioned the magazine closed down because of financial reasons, but as we all know, every time when people say it's about financial reasons, it's actually not. So I was wondering if you know that was the actual reason, or maybe there was another reason that caused it to close down. That's one thing. The other thing was, has it got anything to do with Film Biweekly? Because the time kind of matched, because they closed down in 78 and the Film Biweekly, as far as I remember, they started from 78. So I thought, was that the same people, or is that like no relation whatsoever? So that's the two factual questions. The conceptual one is that, which kind of circles back to the question of today, like, it's Hong Kong just another Chinese city, right? I mean, Jacob would have the argument is that no, Hong Kong is not just another Chinese city. But if we just go down there, right, onto the streets and just ask any random person, I can guarantee you they would tell you Hong Kong is just another Hong Kong, or at least it's becoming to be. That's kind of their argument, like 2046. Right? That's like the deadline for Hong Kong to actually complete the transformation to become like 100% a Chinese city. And a magazine like that will probably be one of their reasoning, their argument. But if you ask them, can we have a magazine like this today in Hong Kong? Their answer probably would be no, and they would quote like the NSL. I know, I mean, like the NSL has been thrown around as like a joke. Like if you say something like semi-sensitive, and then people are like, oh, the NSL police is going to come and like, grab you, right? So we're not supposed to say anything political or anything remotely sensitive or whatever. And there's another thing that I noticed, right? One of the pictures that you showed, right, on your slides, I noticed a kind of, which was very common at the time, like during the 70s, people in Hong Kong were very patriotic, right? You have the Diaoyu Island with the protest, and then you have one of the articles, the picture that you showed up that says Zigmund Kormo or something, right? You know, the colonialist evils, right? So the colonial government was like portrayed by these like hardcore leftists as like the evil or whatever. Whereas people nowadays, right? I mean, we all know who they are, right? You have this camp of people who are kind of nostalgic. I mean, if we call it in a positive light, then they are being nostalgic. But I mean, we all know what they want, right? They want to revert back to the colonial like rule or whatever. We have that sort of people in Hong Kong, right? Saying that, oh, we miss the old days when the British ruled us, and they knew, at least they knew what they were doing. Whereas nowadays, our government don't even know what they're doing. So like I can see that kind of stark contrast, right? This kind of patriotic sentiment, or let me put it this way: if I am to show this sort of patriotic sentiment, people would just point at me and laugh at me and say that, oh, you're just a Chinese, sympathizer, and oh, you're just one of them, or you're like the Wu Mao or whatever, right? You know what I mean? So that's the sort of thing that I've observed.
Most convenient reason you can think about to explain everything. I think there are financial reasons, but of course, because there are other reasons. Because the magazine, I think they regularly were published around 70 to 73, maybe, and they stopped for a long time. Yeah, because a lot of these people, they have other plans. Like they left Hong Kong. Lot of them went to, some of them went to U.S. to continue study. Some of them actually went to Paris to visit one of the most, I think, famous anarchists or tourists from China who were kind of kicked out from China, but he moved to Paris. And I heard from interview, a lot of them went to France and other places in Europe to visit him, but also to try to, travel a bit. So actually, because they were still young at that time, in their 20s, so after a couple of years of doing this, a lot of them have their new life plans. And but then there were also, I recommend you to really watch that film, The Story of Zhongyin, because it kind of suggests how Zhongyin was suspected to betray the rest of the people because he was in mainland and he was questioned by some mainland officials and so on and so forth. And so there were some kind of this kind of rumors going on about Zhongyin, and basically he split with the rest of the people. So there are a lot of reasons behind. But somehow Mo Chuyu made a comeback in 78 by publish a new issue, but also made this film to Hong Kong, RTUs of Hong Kong. So that was, I think, the very last stage of the magazine. So this is the first question. Second question, sorry, can you remind me again? Yeah, the factual one. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think I think if I don't remember wrong, the magazine I mentioned was Film Biweekly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was, sorry. I 78. Yes, yes, I think so. I think so. Yeah. Sorry, my memory was a bit fading away, but I think so. I visited the studio of um, the editor, and I remember he gave me the magazines, and I think they're the same people. Yeah, yeah. And the conceptual one is about patriotism. And so my understanding of, let's take Diaoyu Island, the Defend Diaoyu Island movement as an example. So my argument in the, I don't remember in the introduction or in the Modern China article, was if you compare Taiwan's students' attitude in this movement and Hong Kong's, they're very different. And the Hong Kong, at least from the point of view of these people, because there are several different, streams of people who were participating in the same movement, but they don't necessarily have to share the same political opinion. But for the 70s biweekly people, I think ultimately their goal was not nationalism. They are more on the side for human rights and more global and also universal type of rights. And so that rights including anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, which is a key, I think, theme in their campaign. So it's complicated. I think there are, of course, layers of patriotism, but I wouldn't say it's a predominant one. Yeah. So I think if you read the article, I talk more about how I understand Hong Kong's, or at least this group of people's positioning of themselves in relation to nationalism.
Yeah. Do they use the language of human rights, or is it internationalism?
Yes.
They're talking.
Yes.
So in the 70s, there's that language that's begun to emerge. Yeah, that's right. Okay, good.
I think that's the reason why I want to bring this back to discussion or academia, at least focus. I think so far we take 1997 too, no, I cannot say too seriously. I mean, it's of course important. It's of course a watershed, but I think we should make this jury longer. And also, well, you said if you say direct inference, I mean, Mochuyu, of course, is one of the cases. I mean, at least a living example of how this kind of practice continued from the 70s to now. Yeah, because he was still continuing doing this theater thing and very much connected with, for example, South Asian community in Hong Kong and also grassroots community and blind people in Hong Kong, disabled people in Hong Kong. So a lot of these theater works are really about these people, this marginalized group in Hong Kong. No, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's not mainstream, but there's that kind of. So I think, I mean, you can see a connection. There is hopefully still, I don't know, but like kind of like grassroots organizations which aren't like full on political, and they might do something like for blind people, right, or for environment, or for something like that. This is PolyU goes back to at least here, the 70s.
Yeah. By mainstream, I mean those you can see in Hong Kong Art Festival. I think that's more mainstream. But these are, I mean, Hong Kong is really a city of performing arts, which I learned from some, theatrical group that this is also a colonial legacy because performing arts are more ephemeral. You don't have much like records or archived documents, and so Hong Kong government actually give more fundings to performing arts than fine arts and other types of art forms. So I think at least the PolyU is an example. But the other side, I'm not so sure, but as for example, Film Bi-Weekly is also, you can also see it's a continuation, and not directly in a alternative way, alternative cultural realm, but it's also something that is going. But I think we still need to know more. I think still need to be more inspired by these.
Do we have other comments? We have several Hong Kong experts in the room. I'm looking. Yes, please.
Alberto from CUHK Anthropology. Professor Vukovich mentioned that it was interesting to see how these very different viewpoints were coexisting within the same magazine for a while, and that seemed to me like a small allegory of Hong Kong. And I wonder whether you think, besides the financial aspect, of course, Hong Kong could be a space where we can have that kind of conversations, dialogues, and hybridizations between the many different point of view, not just pro or anti-Western, not just pro or anti-China, but that can create something else. And whether in there you could see maybe the fulfilling of that kind of potential of Hong Kong as East meets West, right? Which has always been a sort of label put on top of Hong Kong, but that in the substance maybe didn't really have much legacy in terms of thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Either of you want to respond?
Feels like it was his trip.
Well, you mean in the near future?
Interesting fruits of this coexistence of very different opposing world viewpoints, local publications, production.
Yeah, that's my argument that this magazine achieved this, but I will also have to say this is not very common even at that time. So which makes this magazine, I think, extra valuable. Because I think there was also very clear opposing political opinions in the 60s and 70s in Hong Kong on the surface, right? But at least you have this space. It was censored and was the office was also, raided by the police I think in the first year of its publication, but it still continued. So I would say I would not generalize saying Hong Kong was like that. It everywhere it tolerates different, diverse, or even opposing political opinions, but at least there was space. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe just apropos of nothing, I was thinking about your comment that maybe the people on the street in Hong Kong would think in 2049 you can't make such a magazine. So just to reiterate, I know very little about Hong Kong. I've come here periodically, mostly for Art Basel or business trips. So I have no place to talk about Hong Kong. But the magazine that she was talking about reminded me a lot of a magazine I used to be involved with called Yishujie, Leap, which is published out of Beijing, and it's bilingual. And I published an article about like the floods of humanity and blood in Tiananmen Square in Chinese, published in mainland in 2015. And you had all sorts of stuff about like LGBTQ and like Hong Kong, all sorts of, obviously, an editorial board there, and indeed in publishing books involved with mainland China today, there's some sort of element of the government. It's not like Leap ever got police raids. It's published by the Modern Media Group of Thomas Shao, and it is still being published right now. I don't find Leap so interesting now, but I think that's more because I'm an almost 40-year-old white guy rather than because the magazine is less interesting. So I would just say maybe those people in the street in Hong Kong are not aware that, in fact, in the very recent past and to some extent the present, there are totally bilingual culture magazines in China that discuss controversial political topics. Because there are, and many are not aware of that, but because I was an editor of it, am aware of that. So that's an interesting thing to note. And another thing to note, I think, whatever the situation in China at the moment, so 2049, sorry, I like American and high school graduate math skills, is 24 years away from now. So if you look at like, a lot can change in 24 years. You look at 24 years ago in Hong Kong, is it completely out of the question that there will be bilingual cultural publications tolerated in the Chinese linguistic space in 20? I wouldn't say so. So I don't know. I think I certainly hear from many people. I was last in HKU last April with a guy named Li Cha, who some of you may know. He has his center here in HKU. And this guy is doing a lot of research about like yeah. I told him to. He was like, Hong Kong or Singapore. I was like, obviously Hong Kong. Singapore is not a real city. He probably asked many people, including me. And I told him that Singapore is not a real city, so of course Hong Kong. Well, maybe. I don't know about that. But I think he seems to be doing well. Anyway, for Shanghai people who made money, Hong Kong is the best option. He's from Jululu, where my son was born as well. Anyway, so this guy is doing a lot of research about the specific members of the Politburo and what's happening next with the leadership. And he's among many people who speculate, currently we have the Wu Linghe government in China. What's going to happen when the children of the 70s take over? And what a lot of people notice is that the people from the 50s, like the current leader, they tend to be relatively conservative. Their childhood experience is grounded in Cultural Revolution and all the stuff of the current leader. Then the children of the 70s are in fact very sort of, relatively speaking, pro-market, open Western stuff. And then actually the children more recently, like the 90s or 2000s, kind of return to being very like nationalist and those Xiaofenhong. So I guess the only moral of the story is I have no idea what people in the street in Hong Kong are thinking. I'm not even sure what I myself am thinking, but I think it would be, it's worth noting, I don't know how many people in Hong Kong in the 70s were reading this magazine. My guess is really not many. And my guess is if you just go in the street near Kennedy Town Tube Station in 1974 and ask how many of you are reading Qixin Niandai, I guess the answer is like really not that many. So a lot of underground stuff is happening, including in the mainland. And what for the future, I think only time will tell. But I remember, for example, going with our mutual friend Wang Bo to Harbin in like 2014 to make a documentary movie in the street. There's no problem. So who knows what's going to happen in China in the future? So that's all I have to say.
Yeah. To have heard so much actual evidence,
Yeah.
numbers, stuff that show that to become a Chinese city is not actually that, it's not such a bad thing. But I'm just so tired. Like my friends who aren't academics, like even the mechanic that I go to fix my car, all the talks about.
You should ask the mechanic. It was about the price of gasoline in mainland China compared to Hong Kong because it's 1/3 the price. I mean, in a way, I can think of many super practical reasons why it would be nice if Hong Kong, for example, real estate prices, food prices were that of Guangzhou.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be great. So it seems to me, I deal with another group of people who self-censor themselves all the time, that is to say Europeans. And it seems to me that sometimes Hong Kong people are over inflating some sort of, the censor in their head is so much bigger than the one in Beijing. And you can tell because in Beijing people say a lot more stuff. That's a reality, for better or for worse. I don't know why. And one last point, we were talking about resentment and nostalgia. Well, it's obvious why people feel nostalgia, right? It's because if my position is good, I feel it's declining, then I'm going to feel bad. I feel good when I think my future is better. I feel bad when I think the future is worse. In that sense, a certain class in Hong Kong. I'm not sure if I agree that the U.S. government ever had sovereignty over Hong Kong. First of all, I don't think the U.S. government really even exists. It's a real thing. I mean, there's a group of people doing something. What they're doing, I don't think even they know. He may well have. And did those guys all decide to leave Hong Kong? If not, he doesn't seem that he was that influential. The U.S. government has one position today, one position tomorrow. But I think it seems to me quite clear that there indeed is a certain group in Hong Kong who got huge benefits from the situation of Western people wanting to invest in China, but not knowing Chinese, so they hire Hong Kong people as like the intermediaries. And maybe those people aren't making so much money anymore. I would be pissed off too. But there's still a lot of opportunities in China, and so I guess my point is that it's making sense. It's kind of easy to understand why a certain group of people will be nostalgic. Actually, it's very normal. After age 40, everyone is nostalgic. But what's less easy for me to understand, I mean, at least when you look at a place like Ohio, well, I mean, it has very severe problems. Who knows how we can fix it? On the other hand, in Hong Kong, you're like a 15-minute train ride from the most like dynamic like tech zone in the world, which is also, by the way, very inexpensive to go to. So I kind of feel there's this weird. One thing she mentioned, Jardines. I find the concept of these corporate archives fascinating. I'm doing research with Saudi Aramco's archive. Well, I swear, but some guy at Jardines told me a few years ago that when they hire iBankers, their first choice is a guy from Beijing whose family has guanxi who went to Tsinghua. Second choice is a guy from Beijing who went to Harvard. Third choice is a white guy who went to Harvard, not because he's actually useful, but sometimes it's nice to have a white guy in the room when you're doing the meeting. And only the last choice is a Hong Kong person who went to HKU, which is very unfair, but because the client is mostly in the mainland, so realistically you're going to have a meeting with the Shenzhen government. The best is if they think, oh, somehow this guy is like the son of someone in Beijing. The second best if you're like, oh, wow, this is a very Yoxiu de Huaren. The third best is, okay, here's a white guy. And then almost like if it's a Hong Kong person who can't really speak Mandarin that well, but also then the local mainland people are like, and then the local mainland people are like, yeah, but do the white people really trust him? Like, can he really make a decision that New York is going to follow? So this is just the hiring logic at Jardines circa 2018. And so if I was a Hong Kong local, I would also be like, wow, that sucks. The primary industry in my city, I can get a job. But I feel that in a sense, it's logical that many Americans would feel this anxiety or resentment or whatever. But I feel it's almost deeply tragic that Hong Kong's youth are next to this amazing phenomena that I, as someone who nothing to do with China, I'm not ethnically Chinese, I'm benefiting all the time. It's right over there, and it's just like this amazing disconnect. Rem Koolhaas thinks it's interesting. I think it's interesting. Dan Vukovich thinks it's interesting. There's like work and money and all that stuff, and it's a little bit sad. But it does feel like, anecdotally at least, that compared to 2019, you have more local Hong Kong people going to the mainland, checking it out, doing stuff. I think that as that continues, that people will understand that lots of interesting stuff is happening in the mainland. So
Yeah.
Good. I thought in China it has a consumption crisis. Anything. I read in the newspaper. but must be in a part of China I'm not in. Chinese people I know consume continuously. Anyway, I should still leave it there.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this. I know we're running about a little bit out of time, but I want to give anybody else a chance to chime in on anything at all. Yes, John, please.
Yeah. As somebody who did grow up in Hong Kong in the 70s and whose parents always had the 70s biweekly lying around the house. I'm in the book. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure it's as unique as you think. And since you mentioned Playboy, I do remember
Cha-cha-cha.
down the road in North Point where I grew up, there was a used magazine shop. And to sell used magazines, there was a policy where you had to rip off the top part of it. And I don't know why. And often right next to Playboy with the top ripped off would be the 70s biweekly. So I don't know about Kennedy Town, if there were many stands there, but I think that this whole sort of atmosphere that we're talking about is not, it may not be as unique as it seems. I mean, this was the 70s, whether it was in Hong Kong or anywhere else. This was an exciting time.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we're all going to peruse our back copies of Playboy later on.
From the 70s.
Not the pages that are stuck together, though. We're just going to keep on.
All right. I think on that note, but thank you, John, for that. Because you're right too. This is global. I kept thinking that too. And when Professor Bond was presenting and looking at her book, like it's a very, very Hong Kong thing. It's so unique to it. But this is such a global firmament at this time, 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, kind of overlapping. So anyway, on that note, we'll wrap up. Thanks a lot for our presenters and for you all for coming. And if you're not on the little email distribution list for the Chags Hub, just shoot me an email, make sure you're on there so you hear about other events as they come up. Right? Right. Thank you all very much. Great.
I think we're.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.